In the application, we have form fields not only inside of registration and authentication forms, but also in some other places, such as this form field, inside of subscription form, or this one, to search for playlists. So now we're going to reuse the same component app form field that we have created in a previous lesson in those two places. But before, I would like to make a few improvements to app form field component. First of all, I would like to accept text for the label from outside as a default slot. So I'm going to use slot component right here. And then we no longer need to declare this label as additional prop. Let's remove this part. And now we have to modify usage of app form field component respectively, so that we no longer pass label as a prop, but instead we're passing it as a text for the default slot in between component tags. Alright, I will just modify all other input fields in the same way inside of registration form and authentication form. Here we also have a couple of app form field components. And the result will be the same. There will be no visual changes at this point. And now let's consider attributes that we are passing into app form field components. Most of those attributes are going to be assigned to the input element itself. So instead of declaring props for each such attribute, what we can do is to use attribute inheritance. And instead of relying on the default behavior of attribute inheritance, where Vue is going to assign those attributes to the root element of the component, we're going to assign such attributes to the input field. But we cannot actually use attribute inheritance for the ID prop because it is also used in here. So I'm going to keep prop declaration for the ID attribute. And for all other attributes, we can use attribute inheritance. First of all, I'm going to disable default behavior of the attribute inheritance by using inherit attrs property with a value of false. And then to specify the element which has to inherit all attributes, I'm going to use vbind directive and specify $attrs variable in here. This is the way how we are disabling default behavior of attribute inheritance in Vue. So from now on, ID attribute is going to be considered as a prop, but all other attributes are going to be inherited by the input element inside of app form field component. So at this point, we're still not going to see any visual changes. And for now, we are ready to move on and reuse app form field component in the rest of places. Let's start with the subscription form. It is located inside of app newsletter content component. I'm going to open up this component, find an input field in there, and replace this input field and use app form field component instead. Additionally, in here we're going to pass placeholder attribute as well as class attribute. And just because we're using attribute inheritance, we don't need to declare any additional props for those attributes. And by the way, most of the classes for an input field are already contained inside of the input field component. So we just have to pass one class in this case that will be unique only for this field. I have lost the prefix for this component. Let's add it in here. And we're seeing that TypeScript is complaining because ID prop is required. So I'm going to add ID in here. And now let's make sure that in a browser, this form field is also represented by the app form field component. But this is kind of an exception because this form field doesn't contain the label, but app label component is still rendered. So to prevent rendering app label component whenever we're not going to pass text for the label, I'm going to switch over to app form field and right here use v4 directive on this app label component and check if default slot has been passed, like so. And after doing that, whenever we're not going to pass any text in between app form field component, this app label component is not going to be rendered at all. And there we go, in Vue component 3, Now we're seeing that app form field component contains only app input without app label, since we haven't passed text for the label. Alright, now moving on to another field, which we're also going to replace with the app form field component, and that is this field on the playlist page. This field is contained within playlist filters component. I'm going to open up this component in the editor, find an input field, and use app form field component instead. So right here, the type of the field will be search. Let's also modify placeholder text, remove class attribute, and also remove the old markup of this field. Alright, cool, we have successfully reused app form field components for subscription form as well as search form on the playlists page. The only thing that we have to fix is styles. If we're going to activate mobile view, right here we can see that this form field is quite big and does not shrink, and the whole layout is kind of broken. So to fix it, I'm going to open up app newsletter content component where we have that form field, and in order to reduce the size of this field on mobile devices, I'm going to specify W60 class that is going to decrease the width of this input field, and starting from bigger screens, we're going to make it bigger and use 96 units. These are Tailwind CSS classes for specifying widths of elements. And with that, we're seeing that styles have been fixed. That's about it for this lesson. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description.